When I was 5 years old, all I wanted to do was become an astronaut, but instead my father brutally murdered my uncle and got sentenced to life in prison. But ever since then, I've occasionally thought about space from time to time. However, apparently space is so dangerous that some astronauts may have wished that they were my uncle instead. The worst astronaut deaths ever by Simple Paints.
Challenger disaster, STS-51L. On the morning of January 28, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger sat on Launch Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center, ready for its 10th mission into space. The crew of 7 included Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, mission specialists Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ronald McNair, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher from New Hampshire, who had been selected as the first participant in NASA's Teacher in Space program.
Bro, who the frick names their child Francis Dick Scobie? Who is this? Francis Dick Scobie. Like, imagine going to high school if your name was Dick. Like, everyone would be like, "Oi, dickhead, how's it going today, dickhead?"
The launch had been delayed multiple times due to weather conditions and technical issues, creating mounting pressure from NASA management and the media to proceed with the mission. The night before launch, engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that manufactured the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, discovered that overnight temperatures had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, far below the minimum temperature at which the rubber O-ring seals in the rocket boosters had been tested. Senior engineers Roger Boisjoli and Alan McDonald strongly recommended postponing the launch, warning that the cold, stiffened O-rings might not seal properly and could allow hot gases to escape from the rocket motors. During a heated teleconference that lasted until midnight, NASA officials challenged Thiokol's concerns, arguing that there was no conclusive proof that cold weather would cause seal failure.
Bro, what do they mean there is no conclusive proof? They are literally talking to the people who created the conclusive proof. These people designed it. They are the engineers. Why wouldn't you listen to the pros? Like, who is this guy? Like, I understand they work for NASA, but at the same time, have they, did they make these actual rubber O-rings? Because minus 7.8 degrees Celsius, that is pretty cold. That's colder than a freezer, I think. I'm pretty sure. And so I assume if you heat something up really quickly after it reaches this, like, low temperature, it will probably just shatter. Because I remember back in the day when I used to, go to the ski slopes and everything and the snow pretty often, I remember finding a rubber band on the ground on the snow, and so it was pretty cold, and so I took that thing home. Keep in mind, I was much younger than I am today, but I took it back to my cabin in the snow, and I tried to wrap it around my dingling, but before I could, even stretch it that far, it completely snapped, because I assume it was that cold.
Under intense pressure to avoid another delay, Thiokol management overruled their own engineers and gave NASA permission to proceed with the launch. At 11:38 a.m. EST, with hundreds of spectators watching, including McAuliffe's family and students from her school, Challenger lifted off into a clear blue sky. The shuttle's 3 main engines and 2 solid rocket boosters functioned normally during the first minute of flight, accelerating the vehicle toward orbit. However, at 59 seconds after liftoff, high-speed cameras captured a small flame appearing near the bottom joint of the right solid rocket booster. The cold, stiffened O-rings had failed exactly as the engineers had predicted, allowing superheated gas at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit to escape and act like a
5,000 degrees Fahrenheit is minus 7.8 degrees Celsius, apparently. Do you guys understand how cold minus 7.8 degrees Celsius is? That is below freezing point in my fridge. Or I think they forgot to copy and paste the correct thing. I think they copy and pasted from here and they forgot to change this one. How can a fire be minus 7.8 degrees Celsius?
Allowing superheated gas at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit to escape and act like a blowtorch against the external fuel tank. The flame rapidly grew larger, burning through the strut that connected the right booster to the external tank and weakening the tank's structural supports. At 72 seconds into the flight, traveling at Mach 1.92 at an altitude of 48,000 feet, the compromised external tank ruptured, releasing thousands of gallons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen that mixed explosively. The massive explosion didn't kill the crew immediately. The crew compartment, built to withstand the forces of launch and re-entry, was thrown clear of the explosion and began falling toward the Atlantic Ocean in a ballistic arc. Emergency oxygen systems activated automatically, and at least some of the crew members were likely conscious during the fall. Pilot Michael Smith was heard saying, "Uh-oh,"
Bro, so the oxygen kept them alive during like an instant death situation where they probably, I don't know, like would it have been better if they had just like had like a slow, no, like a fast, painless death? Because then I assume this emergency oxygen just prolongs their death and makes it even slower than it should have been, I assume.
Just before the vehicle broke apart, indicating that the crew was aware something had gone catastrophically wrong. The crew compartment fell for 2 minutes and 45 seconds, reaching a speed of over 200 miles per hour before striking the ocean surface 18 miles offshore. The impact with the water was unsurvivable, killing all 7 crew members instantly. NASA suspended shuttle flights for 32 months, while a presidential commission investigated the accident and implemented design changes to prevent similar failures. The solid rocket boosters were completely redesigned with improved O-ring seals and joint heaters to ensure proper sealing in cold weather.
And so no one was held accountable? What happened to the person that like suggested to go ahead with it, even despite the engineer's warnings? Because isn't this directly their fault for, you know, trying to go ahead with it? The engineers literally warned them. I hope that was like documented and everything. But then if the thing couldn't survive a like impact with the ocean, then what was the point of it being designed like this anyways? Like why would you tell us that it was 27 kilometers off the shore if like it's not going to make a difference whether they hit the shore or the ocean? Like shouldn't there have been some sort of like parachute or something in this part? Like isn't that like pretty usual? Unless it's not meant to like, you know, like explode down the bottom, unless it's meant to like, you know, cleanly detach and then like have some sort of like parachute somewhere. But the school teacher died in front of all of her students. I think I've heard about this. I think I've read about this case before. So NASA ended up suspending operations for 32 months when they could have just suspended this thing. They could have delayed this launch by another, I don't know, like at least like 1 year. It could have been like a 12-month delay and they still would have, you know, saved more time. They would have saved how many months? Like, I don't know, like 20 months. If they had just waited 12 extra months for like a really good date for launch, then they would have saved 20 months of having to be delayed after this crash.
Vladimir Komarov, Soyuz 1. On April 22, 1967, Vladimir Komarov walked through the corridors of the Baikonur Cosmodrome, knowing he was likely walking to his death. The 40-year-old Soviet cosmonaut had been selected to pilot Soyuz 1, the first crewed flight of the Soviet Union's new spacecraft, designed to outpace America's Apollo program. But Komarov knew what his superiors were hiding from the public. His friend and fellow cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin had desperately tried to convince mission planners to delay the flight. Over 200 technical problems had been identified in the Soyuz spacecraft during pre-flight testing, including critical failures in the parachute system.
Jesus Christ, 200 errors. I would have thought maybe maximum would be, I don't know, 5 to 10 errors, but 200 errors in this thing you're about to fly into space? Even if you only flew this into the sky and it didn't even reach space, I still would not be comfortable flying in an aeroplane with 200 failures, especially ones with critical failures in the parachute system. So they're just gonna sacrifice this random 40-year-old dude and keep all the young people safe because they know that, like, you know, there's a 90% chance that it's gonna blow up. Couldn't they have just done like a test run? Like they just send this up and then, you know, come back down and then we put people on it?
Unstable attitude control and faulty heat shield bonding. Soviet engineers had submitted report after...
Can someone please explain to me what attitude control means? Did they mean altitude control? Like unstable, like altitude, as in like, you know, like your vertical distance off the ground? But instead it's unstable attitude. So the actual spaceship has an attitude. Yeah, it has a bad attitude. And because we can't control the attitude, then it's going to blow up. It's going to get so angry that it's just going to explode.
Soviet engineers had submitted report after report documenting these dangerous defects, but political pressure from the Kremlin overruled safety concerns. The mission was scheduled to coincide with Lenin's birthday and the May Day parade, giving Communist Party leaders a propaganda victory they desperately needed. Komarov understood the impossible situation. If he refused to fly, his backup pilot, Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space and a Soviet hero, would take his place. Komarov couldn't let his friend die in a spacecraft he knew was defective. At 3:35 a.m. Moscow time on April 23rd, Soyuz 1 lifted off from Baikonur into the pre-dawn darkness. The problems began almost immediately. One of the spacecraft's 2 solar panels failed to deploy properly, cutting power generation in half and making it impossible to properly orient the craft toward the sun. Without adequate solar panel positioning, the spacecraft's batteries began draining rapidly. The ion sensors that controlled the craft's attitude became unreliable.
Bro, what do you mean by attitude? Isn't it the altitude? I'm pretty sure there's no difference in spelling like between the US and like Australia in terms of like these words, altitude. So the spaceship literally has a bad attitude, and this is the sole reason why they crashed, because the spaceship is just like too sassy about it. So let me get this straight. So this guy is willing to sacrifice his entire life just to prevent, you know, the other guy who like actually made it to the moon from getting killed in this ship. Bro, I don't know about that. Like, if you were in this situation and you knew this ship was going to blow up, surely you would at least consider, I don't know, like just trying to find a way for everyone to get off. Like, surely you could have staged some sort of like event. Like, maybe you could have, I don't know, like intentionally tampered with the rocket before the launch, and then when they're doing the final inspections, they find like you're tampering and they say, oh no, it's too dangerous, and so they delay it until another day, and then during the delayed period you just escape the country,
causing Soyuz 1 to tumble uncontrollably through space. Komarov fought to stabilize his ship manually, using precious fuel reserves to fire the attitude control thrusters. Ground control monitored the mounting problems with growing alarm. The planned rendezvous with Soyuz 2, which was supposed to launch the next day with 3 cosmonauts aboard, was immediately cancelled.
Damn, okay, I'm surprised. I'm actually surprised that they actually managed to cancel the second one. As soon as they realize there's a problem with part 1, they cancel part 2, okay? This is what should happen all the time. And I feel like even Soyuz 1 should have been cancelled even before it went up, because 200 problems with the ship, and you're still gonna send it up?
After 18 increasingly desperate orbits, Mission Control ordered Komarov to attempt an emergency re-entry over the Soviet Union. As Soyuz 1 began its descent on April 24th, Komarov manually oriented his spacecraft for re-entry, knowing his life depended on systems that had already proven unreliable. The descent through the upper atmosphere proceeded normally at first, with the heat shield protecting the crew compartment as designed. But as the spacecraft slowed to subsonic speeds at an altitude of 23,000 feet, the main parachute container failed to open properly due to a design flaw that engineers had identified months earlier. The parachute became tangled within its container, providing virtually no drag to slow the spacecraft's descent. Komarov deployed the backup parachute system, but it immediately became twisted with the partially deployed main chute and the drogue parachute, creating a tangled mess that was completely ineffective. Soviet listening posts on the ground recorded Komarov's final transmissions as he plummeted toward Earth at over 250 miles per hour. He cursed the engineers and officials who had forced him to fly in a defective spacecraft, knowing he had less than a minute to live.
And I mean, I don't blame him at all. Like, you have 1 minute left to live. You have 3 minutes and 47 seconds left before you know you're gonna just go splat into the ground. But what would you say during those 3 minutes? Like, of course, you're gonna, you know, like, cuss out the engineers who made this stupid thing that, like, tangled like spaghetti. Because isn't the point of a backup parachute to actually, you know, be a 100% foolproof thing if the main parachute fails? How is it possible for a backup parachute to even fail? Like, how is it, like, physically possible? Because I'm pretty sure you're meant to design them so that, like, there's a 0% chance of failure for the backup at least. But yeah, me personally, I'd just spend 90% of the time maybe crashing out at like the people, and then I'd spend like, you know, 10% of the time like giving a message to my family and loved ones and stuff before I go, like, you know, splat.
At 7:24 a.m., Soyuz 1 struck the ground near Orenburg with tremendous force, creating a crater and instantly igniting the spacecraft's remaining fuel. The impact was so violent that the spherical descent module was completely flattened into a disk barely a meter high. Komarov's body was burned beyond recognition, fused to the twisted metal of his spacecraft. It took recovery teams hours to separate his remains from the wreckage. His death forced a complete overhaul of the Soviet space program, delaying crewed flights for 18 months, while engineers redesigned the parachute system and addressed hundreds of other safety issues that political pressure had forced them to ignore.
Well, I mean, I'd hope so, bro. I hope if 2 people die from your stupid parachute, I hope you actually, you know, consider changing the design. But you're only going to delay it for 18 months, bro. If this was me, I would have delayed it for 18 years before, like, anyone could actually make a properly, fully safe spaceship.
Columbia disaster, STS-107. On January 16, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia lifted off from Kennedy Space Center, carrying a crew of 7 astronauts on a 16-day scientific research mission designated STS-107. The crew included Commander Rick Husband, pilot William McCool, mission specialists Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson, and payload specialist Ilan Ramon. The mission was dedicated to scientific research, with the crew operating over 80 experiments in a research module housed in Columbia's cargo bay. During the launch, cameras captured what appeared to be a large piece of foam insulation breaking away from the external fuel tank's bipod ramp area and striking Columbia's left wing leading edge. The impact occurred 81.7 seconds after liftoff, when the shuttle was traveling at approximately 1,568 miles per hour at an altitude of 65,000 feet.
Bro, you're telling me this distance is almost 20 kilometers? So that means the plane, this shuttle, is longer than 20 kilometers. Is that even possible? Apparently a space shuttle is only 56 meters long, but you're telling me it's longer than 20 kilometers.
The foam piece weighed approximately 1.67 pounds and measured about 21 by 27 inches, making it much larger than typical debris that occasionally separated from the external tank. NASA engineers reviewed the high-speed film footage of the impact, but concluded that foam strikes were a common occurrence that had never caused significant damage on previous missions. The debris assessment team, composed of engineers from NASA and Boeing, requested high-resolution images of Columbia's wing from military satellites or telescopes to assess the extent of any damage. However, shuttle program managers denied this request, stating that even if damage was found, nothing could be done to repair it, since Columbia was not equipped for major repairs and could not reach the International Space Station.
Great, so I guess they're just cooked either way. Even if there was damage, like, there's nothing they can do about it. And so I guess this situation is sort of like, if I can't see them, then they can't see me, type of like hide-and-seek type strategy. Because technically, if we don't take a closer look at the image of the damage, then we are unaware, like, the damage doesn't exist. If we can't see a photo, which we intentionally don't zoom in on, then the damage technically doesn't exist.
This decision would prove fatal, as the foam strike had indeed caused serious damage to the wing's thermal protection system. The impact had created a hole approximately 6 to 10 inches in diameter in one of the reinforced carbon-carbon panels that protected the wing's leading edge during re-entry. For the next 16 days, the crew conducted their scientific experiments completely unaware that their spacecraft had been fatally damaged. They completed all planned research activities, working in shifts around the clock to maximize the scientific return from their mission. Their daily communications with mission control were routine and upbeat, with no indication that anyone suspected a problem with the shuttle. On February 1st, 2003, Columbia began its re-entry sequence over the Pacific Ocean, firing its orbital maneuvering system engines to slow down and drop out of orbit. As the shuttle descended through the upper atmosphere at over 17,000 miles per hour, it began encountering the first wisps of atmospheric gas that would gradually slow it down through friction. At first, the re-entry proceeded normally, with the crew following standard procedures for landing at Kennedy Space Center. However, as Columbia descended through increasingly dense atmosphere, superheated plasma began flowing through the hole in the left wing's leading edge. The temperature inside the wing structure quickly reached over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, far exceeding the melting point of aluminum and causing the wing's internal framework to fail. Sensors throughout the left side of the spacecraft began registering abnormal temperature readings and system failures, but the crew was not immediately aware of the severity of the situation.
But I mean, no offense, if I was on this crew and I like sort of realized that there was a hole, like in GTA, if there was some sort of hole on a spaceship or a plane I was in, that guys were sort of coming back down to Earth. So they said the hole was like 6 to 10 inches long, which is pretty perfect because my own dingling just so happens to be 12 inches. And so technically I could just like, you know, go out there in a suit and just plug it up with my dingling. Although, yeah, it would be pretty hard to sort of like survive like the blast going back into like the orbit. But you're telling me this hole was created by a 0.75 kilogram foam block? That's a 750 gram foam block. That is like the weight of like my mouse, like this mouse over here. So I guess it was sort of hard to believe how a foam block could cause that much damage. But at the same time, surely they just could have zoomed into the photos, seen the damage, and then told them to just come back quickly and then like, you know, quickly touch up the thing and then go back into space. Because they spent 16 days up there. I'm surprised like that nothing happened to them over those 16 days. And these little frickers were just communicating with them every single day, pretending like nothing was wrong. Everything was completely a-okay. Bro, that is actually messed up.
At 8:59 a.m. EST, while traveling over Texas at an altitude of 207,000 feet, Columbia's left wing finally separated from the fuselage due to the structural damage caused by the superheated gas intrusion. The shuttle immediately became uncontrollable and broke apart due to aerodynamic forces, with debris scattered across Texas and Louisiana. The crew compartment was destroyed in the breakup, and all 7 astronauts died instantly. The accident investigation led to major changes in shuttle operations, including detailed inspections of the thermal protection system on every mission and the capability to repair minor damage while in orbit.
But we're still not gonna add zooming, like the actual images to this list. Like, I feel like if they had zoomed into the images, they would have been able to recall the thing back and then like, you know, like repair it and then send it up another day. So instead of taking accountability for like checking the images and stuff, we're just gonna, you know, just do more detailed inspection for the thermal layer. But like in this situation, I still think like even if you do damage it, like yes, you can technically repair it, but no amount of detailed inspection beforehand is going to, you know, change the fact that if it does get hit by some sort of debris as it's going up, you still need to like, you know, to like zoom in, take a look at it to see whether you should like recall it back, because this happens before it goes up. Like it gets hit by the debris and then like, bro, like what's the detailed inspection meant to do? Because it's like you've done that beforehand, but it gets hit by the debris.
X-15, Flight 36597. On November 15th, 1967, U.S. Air Force Major Michael J. Adams climbed into the cockpit of X-15-3 at Edwards Air Force Base for what would be his 7th flight in the experimental rocket plane. The 37-year-old test pilot had been selected for the X-15 program based on his exceptional skills flying high-performance aircraft, and he was being considered for NASA's Astronaut Corps. The X-15 was designed to explore the boundary between atmospheric flight and space flight, reaching altitudes above 50 miles where conventional aircraft could not operate. Adams's mission, designated Flight 36597, called for him to reach an altitude of 250,000 feet while testing a new ultraviolet stellar photography experiment and evaluating the aircraft's reaction controls in the near vacuum of space.
But let me guess, he ends up going too far up and he gets like sort of stuck in space, and then like he just can't come back down. Because like, what are you meant to do in that situation if you get stuck in space? But I guess rockets would like still kind of work though. You can still kind of go down maybe.
The flight plan seemed routine by X-15 standards, but several factors would combine to create a deadly situation. At 10:30 a.m., Adams' X-15 was released from the wing of a modified B-52 bomber at 45,000 feet over the Mojave Desert. He immediately ignited the XLR-99 rocket engine, which produced 57,000 pounds of thrust and accelerated the aircraft to over 3,800 miles per hour. As the X-15 climbed steeply through the atmosphere, Adams reported normal engine performance and aircraft handling. The rocket plane reached its planned altitude of 266,000 feet, officially entering space and making Adams the first person to die during a spaceflight. However, during the high altitude...
Wait, spoiler alert. We're not even gonna say he was the first person to like reach space like during like a regular plane. He's just gonna be known as the first person to die even before he dies in this video? What?
However, during the high altitude portion of the flight, something went wrong with the aircraft's attitude control system. The X-15 began an inadvertent yaw motion that Adams initially didn't recognize because the thin atmosphere at that altitude provided almost no aerodynamic feedback. The spacecraft's reaction control system, designed to provide control in space, was not functioning properly, and Adams found himself in a slowly developing emergency that would prove fatal. As the X-15 began its descent back into the atmosphere, the yaw motion became more pronounced, causing the aircraft to enter a spin. Adams attempted to correct the problem using the aircraft's conventional aerodynamic controls, but at such high altitude and speed, they were largely ineffective. Ground controllers at Edwards Air Force Base tracked the aircraft's erratic flight path on radar and tried to provide guidance, but communications were intermittent due to the plasma sheath surrounding the hypersonic aircraft. As the X-15 descended through 200,000 feet, it began encountering thicker atmosphere, which should have allowed Adams to regain control using conventional flight controls. However, the aircraft's angle of attack had become so extreme that it was essentially flying sideways through the air at over 3,000 miles per hour.
Okay, so I assume the yaw motion means sort of like when you're sort of skydiving and then you get into like an uncontrollable spin sometimes. And so I assume that happened to this plane because yeah, but like if you enter space, there's like no gravity, is there? And so I assume it'd be extremely easy to get into like that sort of motion. But of course, the most important part of this plane malfunctions as soon as he enters space. Like I think like the thing is meant to stabilize him as he like reaches space with like zero gravity. This is like the complete opposite of plot armor. Like the one thing that he just needed. Like he could have had zero thrust, zero everything, and he would have survived if he had this thing, I'm pretty sure.
The aerodynamic forces on the aircraft were enormous and increasing rapidly as it entered denser air. At approximately 65,000 feet altitude, while traveling at Mach 3.5, the X-15 encountered G-forces that exceeded the structural limits of both the aircraft and the human body. The aircraft began to break apart under the extreme aerodynamic loads, with pieces separating from the main fuselage. Adams, subjected to forces exceeding 15 Gs, likely lost consciousness before the aircraft's final breakup. The main wreckage of X-15-3 impacted the ground near Johannesburg, California, creating a crater several feet deep. Adams's body was found still strapped in his ejection seat, but the seat had never been activated.
But I mean, even if he did like activate the ejection seat, I'm pretty sure his plane was going at such like a weird sort of like it was like a helicopter propeller, basically his whole plane. And so I feel like even if he did eject himself out, I think there's probably a chance he would have got hit by his own plane and like sliced up anyways. But this guy hit 15 G's of force. So basically, for reference, I'm pretty sure most like modern roller coasters hit like a maximum of 5 G's. So just imagine like the scariest roller coaster you've ever been on, and then multiply that by like 10. So that would be 5 G's. But this guy had 3 times that amount. So of course, like his body would have been like crumpled by then, even if he did somehow survive. Actually, wait, no, he was intact. I think his body was intact, but it was just that he was crumpled by like the G forces.
Investigation revealed that the aircraft's adaptive flight control system had malfunctioned during the high altitude portion of the flight, initiating the yaw motion that Adams was unable to correct. The tragedy led to improvements in pilot training for high altitude flight and better backup control systems for spacecraft operating at the edge of the atmosphere. Adams was posthumously awarded astronaut wings for his flight, becoming the first person to earn them by dying in space.
Bro, isn't this like a little bit disrespectful? Because you're gonna give him this award purely for dying in space. I don't know whether this guy even wanted this award. Like, I don't know whether this guy wanted to be the first person to die in space. I think he wanted to be the first person to fly in space in a plane and then, you know, return back to Earth safely. But also, how was the response from NASA to improve the pilot training as if it was the pilot's fault, like, that he got into this situation? Because I'm pretty sure it was the plane's fault. Like, the plane malfunctioned. I'm pretty sure the pilot did everything fine, right? And so why are they just blaming the pilot by saying, okay, so now to fix this issue, we're gonna train our pilots even better? Bro, it wasn't the pilot's fault, was it?
Soyuz 11 crew. On June 6, 1971, Soviet cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev launched aboard Soyuz 11 from Baikonur Cosmodrome, beginning what appeared to be a routine mission to dock with Salyut 1, the world's first operational space station. The 3 men were experienced spaceflight veterans, with Dobrovolsky serving as commander, Volkov as flight engineer, and Patsayev as research engineer.
AKA, this guy was just third wheeling. They just did not know how to give him some sort of title, so they just gave him research engineer. They just chucked one of the researchers on there because they didn't know like who else to put on there. We actually have like a flight person, a commander, and then the research engineer. So this guy's just some sort of like bookworm or something. What is he doing on this spaceship? How did he end up on this spaceship?
Their mission was to spend 3 weeks aboard the space station, conducting scientific experiments and proving that humans could live and work in space for extended periods. The launch proceeded flawlessly, and 24 hours later, Soyuz 11 successfully docked with Salyut 1, making the crew the first humans to occupy a space station. For the next 22 days, the cosmonauts conducted a wide variety of experiments, including astronomical observations, materials processing, biological research, and Earth photography. They established new endurance records for spaceflight duration and proved that humans could adapt to long-term weightlessness.
Bro, but did you guys see that one frame over here? So they did, was it biological experiments? What could be possibly happening over here? Where did they get this random victim from? Are they doing some sort of like gooning experiment in space? Like, are they trying to test the effects of gooning in space? If you know, like bust a fat load in space, will it, you know, have enough force to actually hit the wall, or will it just float and just be everywhere? Imagine just minding your own business in the space station, just doing your own thing, just researching, and then all of a sudden you get hit by a flying piece of someone's homemade special sauce, hits you right in the eye.
Their daily communications with ground control were upbeat and professional, with no indication of any problems aboard the station. The crew exceeded all their planned objectives and even requested additional experiments to fill their remaining time. On June 29th, after completing their highly successful mission, the crew sealed the hatches between Salyut 1 and their Soyuz 11 spacecraft and prepared for the journey home. The undocking sequence proceeded normally at 21:28 Moscow time, with the spacecraft separating cleanly from the space station. 40 minutes later, the crew fired their service module engine for the deorbit burn, beginning their descent toward a landing site in Kazakhstan. All spacecraft systems appeared to be functioning normally as Soyuz 11 entered the upper atmosphere. The service module and orbital module separated from the descent module as planned, leaving the 3 cosmonauts sealed inside the small spherical capsule that would carry them through re-entry and landing. The heat shield performed perfectly, protecting the crew compartment from the extreme temperatures generated by atmospheric friction. The drogue parachute deployed at the correct altitude, followed by the main parachute, which opened properly and slowed the spacecraft to a safe descent rate. The soft landing rockets fired automatically just before touchdown, cushioning the impact as Soyuz 11 settled gently onto the Kazakhstan steppe at 2:17 a.m. on June 30th. recovery helicopters were already circling overhead, and ground crews rushed to the spacecraft expecting to congratulate three heroes who had just set a new spaceflight duration record.
Successful.
When the recovery team opened the hatch of the descent module, they found all three cosmonauts still strapped in their seats, motionless and blue-faced. There were no signs of impact trauma or fire, but the men were clearly dead.
Bro, but then who was driving the spaceship this entire time if all of them were dead? Maybe, you know what, maybe this could have been some sort of, I don't know, like, assassination or something. Maybe one of them went rogue and sort of unalived everyone because of, like, some sort of, like, political sort of thing. Because this is Russia, right? Or maybe Russia didn't like the fact that the parachute was rainbow, and so they sent someone onto here in the middle of space to unalive all of them because maybe one of them packed it in rainbow. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with rainbows. There's nothing wrong with being gay. We are very inclusive in the 7-Eleven's community.
Medical examination revealed that the crew had suffocated when a pressure equalization valve had opened prematurely during the descent sequence, allowing the cabin atmosphere to vent into the vacuum of space. The valve was designed to equalize cabin pressure with the outside atmosphere just before landing, but it had malfunctioned and opened while the spacecraft was still above the Kármán line at an altitude of 550,000 feet. The cabin depressurized in just 112 seconds, causing rapid decompression that the unprotected crew could not survive. Investigation revealed that the valve had been damaged during the separation sequence when explosive bolts fired to jettison the orbital and service modules. A bolt or piece of debris had damaged the valve mechanism, causing it to open at the wrong time. The crew had likely lost consciousness within 15 to 20 seconds of decompression beginning and died within a minute from hypoxia. The tragedy led to major changes in Soviet spacecraft design, including reinforced pressure valves and the requirement that crews wear pressure suits during all launch and re-entry operations, a practice that continues today.
Bro, this would be a pretty messed up way to die because you're basically just suffocating, like running out of oxygen. But at the same time, 15 to 20 seconds, you're sort of like unconscious. And so, I don't know, like, are you going to be like gasping for air during those 15 seconds? Or do you barely notice that? Like, do you barely notice that like your oxygen is sort of like slipping away? Like, because I think you can still breathe in and out, but it's just that the oxygen is not present.